All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Kearnan, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And Martyn, this week we do have the Rugby League World's 500th issue on the desk. Pull it up and show the listeners.
Issue number 500, a great issue. Congratulations to Lorraine Marsden, the editor, who's done a wonderful job looking back over the history of Rugby League World magazine. Of course, it started as Open Rugby in 1976. That's 48 years ago, Jake. Crikey. It's a long time, isn't it? But we've reached issue number 500. It's a terrific issue. You can get hold of it by going on to the totalrl.com website and going into the shop and ordering a copy. And you can win a great prize with this issue of a trip to Perpignan, 3-day trip to Perpignan next year, courtesy of Catalan Sports Tours. And I think it's some wonderful reading in here, and quite a few people have phoned us up to congratulate us on on this issue. So if you've got a bit of time and you fancy a bit of rugby league reading, get hold of a copy, is my advice. When do you think would be the ideal time to schedule that match down in Perpignan, or that trip down to Perpignan? Well, they can do it. It's open to you to go on any of the trips that they organise, depending on which team you support. So if you're a Leeds fan, you'll go when Leeds are there. If you're a Saints fan or Wigan fan or Warrington fan, you'll go when your team goes. So, but first thing you've got to do is to enter the competition. Yeah, absolutely. We encourage all our listeners and readers to get involved. Buy the magazine and then enter the competition. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. But, mate, we had some interesting action take place over the weekend. Lots of rugby league to get into. How about we start on Friday night? We had Warrington defeating Castleford 28 points to 6. A good win for Warrington. Yes, with a very notable try, our try of the week, Cai Taylor-Wray, this young teenager who came in to fill in for Matt Duffy's absence and scored an absolute humdinger of a try, didn't he? So if you've seen that one, that's absolutely fantastic. And he looks to be a real star in the making. We've got a lovely interview with him, by the way, in League Express this week, thanks to our reporter Stephen Ibbotson, who spoke to Cai after the game, and he looks like a really level-headed, smart young kid, I've got to say, and I think he's going to be a future star of our sport. I was going to ask you, just looking at that Warrington backline, are they going to struggle to keep him? I'm sure there'll be heaps of clubs circling after that performance. Well, I don't think they'll struggle to keep him from an English club, but they might in the long term struggle to keep him from an NRL club, I would suggest, depending on what his ambition is, of course. So, but I always say with young players who burst through into the first team, let's enjoy them while we can. And I think, that try was the first, his first Super League try, but I suspect it won't be his last. And it looks like Matt Duffy, he could be on the sidelines for a few weeks yet. Yes, he could be. He had surgery over the weekend, I saw a post, so just on that knee, I believe it was. So plenty of opportunity for Cai going forward. And absolutely. I'm very excited to see how he goes. Very much so, yes. But we'll move on to the Leeds matchup. So Leeds defeated Catalans 18 points to 6. Yeah, isn't it an interesting battle for the top 6 at the moment, because you've got Lee in 7th and Leeds in 8th, who are now just 1 and 2 points behind the top 6. You've got St Helens and Catalans just ahead of those two clubs, then Salford 2 points further ahead. And, those clubs, particularly Saints and Catalans, are just showing a degree of vulnerability, really, aren't they, at the moment? And it wouldn't be at all surprising to see Lee and Leeds overtake them. I mean, Leeds are at London this weekend, which will be London's final home game, so that's likely to be a win for them. Lee have got a much more difficult game at home against Warrington, which will be an absolute fabulous game, I'm pretty sure. So I can't wait to see that one. And it's really building up to a great climax. I mean, if you sort of use an analogy of a horse race, you've got Lee and Leeds coming up on the rails as they enter the final furlong, haven't you? And who knows? They might get there, and I think they probably will.
Yeah.
But the question is, who's going to drop out?
That's right. And you look at both competitions at the moment in the Southern Hemisphere. There's an intense race for that final spot.
Absolutely.
And the same over
George
here.
Illawarra just fell, didn't they, against the Bulldogs?
Yes.
And you've got 4 teams.
I know they versus Cronulla, I think.
No, they fell against Cronulla. That's right.
Yeah.
It was at Wollongong, wasn't it? You're right. But you've got 4 teams immediately outside the top 8 and 2 points behind. Obviously, Brisbane, the Dolphins. You've got the Raiders, and incredible race for that, and the Knights, of course. So amazing, and it's great to see such a tight competition on both sides of the world as we enter the final stages.
No, definitely. Moving into Saturday's matchups, we had Hull KR defeating Saints 42 points to 6.
4 tries to Joe Burgess, our Player of the Week, because of that, of course, League Express Player of the Week. And yes, incredible performance by Hull KR. I mean, against a very weakened St Helens, it has to be said, who were playing, a number of real young kids. You got George Whitby making his debut, try-scoring debut, incidentally, which was great to see. But, very, very under-strength St Helens side, so they'll be desperately hoping to get some players back before the end of the season. But Hull KR just keep rolling on, Interesting watching the Sky coverage of that game. I think John Wilkin and Sam Tompkins were saying that a lot of people have been watching Hull KR this season and they keep expecting them to, slip at some point. But they aren't doing. They're if anything, they're getting stronger as each week goes by, which is remarkable, isn't it? And you've got to say that they are absolutely outstanding. They're leading the table at the moment, and who's to say they're not going to be leading it by the end of round 27?
Well, I had a look at the last few games they've played, and I'm pretty sure it's the last 6 matches they've played, they've won every match by more than 30 points, which is just phenomenal.
They've got a tough run in, though. They play Salford, Wigan, Leeds, who are all contenders. So, there are no easy games for Hull KR, in the remainder of the season. That makes it particularly interesting, doesn't it? If they can beat all those 4 sides, then they will really deserve to have won the League Leaders' Shield. And it would be great to see them at Old Trafford for the first time ever. And,
the weekend, it wasn't a one-off performance for Joe Burgess. He's been doing this for the past 3 or 4 weeks, it seems, as well.
Player. Yeah.
Some of the tries he's scoring, some of the work he does bringing the ball out of their end.
It's interesting to look at, Hull KR's, wing spots, Joe Burgess and Ryan Hall. Ryan Hall has broken some records this year, but and has tended to overshadow Joe Burgess a bit because of that. But Burgess is a really fine player, and they picked him up from Salford, didn't they, earlier this season? And he's proved to be a great signing for them.
And like the combination between him and Peter Heku, I know Heku sort of got him into space a few times over the weekend. They seem to be gelling really, really well. And
again, we spoke to Peter Heku last week, and he's enjoying life in Hull, and he's very settled at Hull KR, and it's everything's going well for them. And you've got to give Willie Peters enormous credit for what he's doing. I've said in my column this week that he's the coach of the year, almost no matter what happens from now on. If Hull KR lost every game from now on, he'd still be a contender for coach of the year. But the way things are, he's the number 1 pick as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I agree. Who would you say is second in that running?
Well, I would say Sam Burgess, actually. I would say Sam Burgess is, Sam's... Nobody quite knew how Sam would handle it. A lot of people thought that, he'd do very well because obviously he's such a competitive guy. But it's one thing being competitive, it's another thing having the skills to, pilot a team like Warrington, into the top 2 or 3 as the season unfolds. And he's done a fantastic job. And, it's certainly between those 2 as coach of the year. Obviously, Matty Peet, you can't overlook him either at Wigan, but you almost expect Wigan to be up there, don't you?
Yeah.
And which is probably a bit unfair on on Martyn and the players at Wigan, because people sometimes overlook how great they are, because of the expectations that come with them. But I don't think many people expected Hull KR to be right up there before the start of the season. It's
kind of like how Ivan Cleary and Craig Bellamy are often overlooked for Coach of the Year.
Absolutely.
Because they're just always successful.
Yes,
so,
they are.
It's a tough one to judge sometimes. Just in that match, mate, the Tommy Makinson red card send-off, it looks like he's going to get 3 games for that high shot on Tyrone May.
Yeah.
Just watching that one live, I thought, it was interesting watching Tyrone May's actions, because it almost looked like he was telling the ref, let's keep playing, like, don't hold up the match.
Yes.
And then the ref sort of had to have a look at it. 3 games, do you think it's a bit harsh?
Well, Tommy Makinson is not a player who deliberately, goes out to tackle anybody high, or, it's a bit harsh in a way, although he's been sent off previously this year as well as Tommy. Perhaps he just needs to... I mean, he's an incredibly competitive player, and he puts everything into his tackles, and maybe he just needs to stand back a bit and look at his own technique and just adjust it a little. Not much, but just a little, to avoid making that contact with an opponent's head.
Yeah. Oh, it looks like, because if he does get the 3 games, I believe is that set in stone now? I think it might be.
But, I think it might be, yeah.
But that could be his last game with St Helens at home if they don't
qualify for the playoffs. Yeah. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Which would be a shame.
He's going to Catalans next year.
We'll move on to the next matchup. We had Salford defeating Huddersfield 60 points to 10.
Gosh, wasn't that embarrassing for Huddersfield and for their coach? Who Luke Robinson, who would like to become the full-time coach at Huddersfield, but that game won't have done him any favours, of course. And nobody's quite sure who the new coach is going to be at Huddersfield, and there are actually very few rumours about who it will be. But it was obviously deflated. Was Luke? And the funny thing was, for the first 10 minutes, Huddersfield looked quite threatening. They set the pace of that game, but once Salford scored, they just ran away with it. 3 tries to Ryan Braley, for example, and he was back to his best, and Salford just controlled the game without a great deal of difficulty, and Huddersfield looked absolutely shattered by the end of it. It was a sort of game, Jake, that sort of suggested to me that, by the time you get to game 23 in the season, the season's too long, really, and Huddersfield look as though they can't wait for it to end, to be honest.
Yeah, and just watching Huddersfield, they've been a frustrating team to watch all year long.
Very much
because
so.
You just don't know what Huddersfield you're going to get on the day.
No.
And there's been many times where there's been, I guess, upsets, and times I've tipped against them and then tipped with them, and then they've been blown out. It's so hard to pick.
It was a problem for them on Saturday when Jake Connor had to leave the field late in the first half and didn't come back. And that seemed to deflate them, and, they never really seemed to recover from it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's right. But we will get into, in your column you mentioned shortening the season, and we sort of touched on it last episode, but we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, we'll move into Sunday's matchups. We had Lee defeating London 32 points to 12.
Well, that was a really evenly contested game for about the first 65 minutes, wasn't it? It looked as though it could go either way. But then Lee ran away with it with 3 tries towards the end of the game, and obviously that win was expected by Lee, and it consolidates them just outside the top 6. But London, it was their final. No, it wasn't their final home game. The final home game is this weekend. But you sort of saw Josh Rourke again playing very well. A lot of London's team were playing very well, and it just makes me so sad to think that they, are not going to be in Super League next year. We need a London team in Super League is the quite simple fact as far as I'm concerned, and they won't be there, and that's just so sad.
And because that, it's sort of hard to predict how they're going to go in the championship next year, because you'd have to expect they're going to lose some of these players to Super League clubs next year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interested to see how they go, and fingers crossed they don't lose too many for their sake.
Absolutely.
Moving into the final matchup of the weekend, we had Wigan defeating Hull FC 22 points to 4.
Well, I thought that Wigan would win by a greater margin than 18 points. So in that sense, it was a successful game for Hull, wasn't it? And Wigan, I think, didn't have to get out of third gear to win that game. They're still missing some key players, aren't there? There was no Harry Smith, no Bevan French. Jay Field had a very good game for them at full-back, though. And, they had Cruz Leeming at hooker instead of Brad O'Neill, who's out for the season and beyond. So, it was a satisfactory win for Wigan. Not a thrilling win, I don't think. But Hull... what can you say about Hull that we've not said already so far this season? They've been a major disappointment, and it comes to something, doesn't it, when you say that a defeat by 18 points is actually not a bad result for them.
That's right.
That's not so great.
Yeah. Just a couple of other talking points following the weekend's actions. I just wanted to touch on Jayden Nikorima, who's also on the front cover of this week's League Express. Hasn't he fit in really well with Salford since his mid-season? And haven't
Catalans missed him, I think. Anyway, Catalans are completely missing an attacking threat, really. I mean, Jayden Nikorima is a running standoff half.
Yep.
And he's fitted in really well with Mark Sneyd, in my view, at Salford, because Sneyd is a kicking halfback, Nikorima's a running halfback, so they combine together well. And in the meantime, Catalans Dragons are missing that particular skill. They don't seem to have anybody who can, be a threat near the opposition line in the opposition half. And no, I mean Salford do have the habit of making some pretty smart signings, Jake. And they've got a limited budget, but what they spend it on, they seem to work quite well.
That's right. And Nene McDonald, he's another perfect example.
Well, another wonderful example of a player who was more or less sacked by his previous club, Leeds, because he fell out with the coach at the time. He wanted to go back home for personal reasons to Australia and wanted to stay a bit longer than the club wanted him to be there. So they gave him the push, and he ended up at Salford and has had an absolute brilliant season for them. And Nikorima's similar, did a foolish thing, went to a concert instead of going to the international game in Toulouse, and, claimed to be injured, but, hopefully learned his lesson and was given a second chance by Salford, and he's taken it.
No, absolutely. And the other talking point, Lee, sit 1 point out of the playoffs now.
Well, I think Lee will get there in the end. But again, interesting to look at their remaining games, because they've got Warrington at home this weekend, then Castleford away, which won't be easy, but they should win. Then Hull KR at home and St Helens at home. That final game against St Helens, that could be a massive game with qualification for the top 6 being at stake, potentially. And, wouldn't that would fill the Leeds Sports Village, I think.
I agree.
An amazing prospect, to be honest.
And, a lot riding on this weekend's matchup with Warrington. So
there's no doubt about it, yeah.
We'll see how they go. All right, mate, we'll take a quick look at the Albert Goldthorpe medal table. Not much change, again, with the top 3. So that means there's a few other players slowly climbing the ranks, but the top 3 still remains Mark Sneyd, number 1, with 26
Matt
points.
On 22, and we know Matt won't win it now because, of course, he's out for the remainder of the regular season, I think.
That's
so,
right.
Yes, it's looking pretty static at the moment.
Yep.
Obviously, the only people who got points this week, Tom Amone got a point for Lee, and Ryan Braley came into the top 10 with a point for Salford. 3 points for Salford. So, and that was it. That's the limit of it. So, a lot of players are earning points who perhaps haven't starred much earlier in the season.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a tight race.
It looks it, doesn't it?
I mean, if Mikey Lewis gets a few points between now and the end of the season, he could close in from third on Mark Sneed.
He certainly could, and it would be a great time to start doing that, wouldn't it? Right. I mean, they play against each other this weekend. Olcar v Salford. Yeah, so that's going to be an interesting one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Moving on, mate, to some of the things you spoke about in your column. One of the things you touched on was your proposition for shortening the season. Now, we talked about this a little bit last episode. I think someone might have left a comment in the under the YouTube video saying that we can't shorten the season due to the Sky Sports funding, but we sort of more or less talk about shortening the season from focusing on other areas like international fixtures and
yes.
Player welfare and things like that.
Yes.
But yeah, what was some of the things you touched on in your column this week?
Well, I think the thing is that a lot of people who say that the season shouldn't be shortened make the point that the clubs need 13 home fixtures in order to pay the bills and obviously in order to pay the players. But the thing is that ignores the point that if you did shorten the season, each game would appear to be more vital than it does at the moment. And I think if you shorten the season, at the moment we play 13 home games. Let's imagine that we played 11 home games instead of 13. So in other words, you're only playing 11/13ths of the total number of games you're playing now. My suspicion is that the crowds would rise probably by 20% or so, which would more than make up for the loss in fixtures. And I think it would make the whole season far more vibrant. It would give room for other competitions too. It would give room for international games. So, I would go for that. And the clubs need to stop being so timid about it, I think, because the other argument, Jake, is that if the clubs need 13 games to pay the bills and so on, they might as well, if the answer is always playing more games, they might as well play 52 weeks a year and have 26 home games. And that's just obviously ridiculous. But you can't do it. Rugby league is the most demanding collision sport in the world. I think more demanding than gridiron football. And you can't. We're just seeing how many players are out injured at the moment for a whole variety of teams, and it inevitably detracts from the competition when so many players are picking up knocks, because the sport is so collision based, and ultimately we're going to have to do something about that, I think.
And you throw in Challenge Cup fixtures,
absolutely,
playoffs. You look at a team like Wigan who has made it all the way to the Challenge Cup final and won. They've played playoffs rugby in the past couple of years. Some of their players will be playing, well over 30 games a season.
Well,
you throw in pre-season matches, international matches as well.
No doubt.
But you also touched on potentially introducing a conference sort of based system.
Well, the thing is, I study quite. I'm quite a bit of a nerd, really, in the sense that I like studying how different football competitions of various codes of football are organised throughout the world, and trying to find out which would be the best to apply to British Rugby League. And I think the right structure, you can find it in Major League Soccer. And I won't go into, I've talked about this before, I won't go into it in great length there, but basically Major League Soccer puts the primacy of the competition above the club's interests. The competition is everything, and it's thrived and gone from strength to strength as a result of that. But I also think that if you're going to have a viable league system at an elite level, I think you probably need at least 16 clubs to give you the variety that you need, the range of clubs that are competing and so on. And it's no surprise that if we look to Australia, the NRL has thrived since it went to 16 and now 17 clubs. And similarly, the AFL thrived when it expanded out of Victoria and incorporated clubs from the rest of Australia, and they've now got 18 teams. You've got the gridiron. The NFL in America has 32 teams, Major League Soccer now, I think it's got up to about 30 teams. In the days when they started in 1996 with 12 clubs, as we did with Super League, and for several years it wasn't very successful. But it started being successful when it expanded the number of clubs, took more clubs in, and then it really took off. We've stayed at 12 clubs since 1996, apart from a short period or so when we had 14. So, we wonder why rugby league isn't taking off, don't we, in this country, despite it being, in my opinion, the best sport of all to watch, the best code of football to watch. And one reason is that we don't have enough clubs at the elite level. So I think we ought to be thinking about having at least 16.
And one of the concerns they always raised with the NRL before they expanded was, do we have the talent? And are we going to see the product diminishing in quality?
Well,
I don't think that's been the case at all. Since
I don't think it has at all. And the thing is, if you've got more clubs, you give more opportunities, then you will naturally generate more young people wanting to play the game. So, I think that's a false argument, personally.
I guess some of the clubs may be opposed due to losing their cut or a decreased cut when it comes to... there is a saying, isn't there? Short-term pain for long-term gain. And that's true of, professional sport. It's true in this particular sense as well, that they might get a lower cut of the share of the money, but in the long term, I think the money would rise as the competition grew in popularity. There's another sense, by the way, in which that short-term pain, long-term gain is quite an important, truism for rugby league, and that is, and it comes back to St Helens. St Helens have had all these injury problems this year, and they've given outings to a lot of youngsters, as we saw against Solskjaer on the weekend, and obviously there's short-term pain for them, but Paul Wellens makes it clear in League Express this week that actually there is long-term gain for St Helens in doing that, because it gives him a far greater insight into how these players can perform when they do come into the first team. And we are seeing the future of St Helens, aren't we? When we see those young players making a breakthrough. Yeah, and the thing is, I've noticed this season is the amount of debuts we've seen come in and succeed has been incredible. I think it's not often a debutant plays and we go, oh, I'm not sure if he's quite ready for Super League yet. Yeah. It's been quite the opposite this season.
Absolutely.
So I mean, there's no doubt
Harry Robertson
there.
Coming in for St Helens, to replace Jack Wellesby at full back looks a real fine prospect, doesn't he? For example.
That's right. Yeah. Even like Cai Taylor-Ray, we've seen Leon Hayes come in this year and killed it. So there's a lot of talent there that's just waiting for their opportunity, and maybe another team into Super League would help get them the opportunity to showcase it.
I think so.
Moving on to some other news, mate. Roger Tuivasa Sheck has elected to represent Samoa.
Yeah, isn't that great?
Which means we should see him over here at the end of the year.
Yes, and my goodness, think about a centre partnership if you play centre with Stephen Crichton. That's going to be really quite interesting, to say the very least, isn't it? And Samoa will be a real threat this year, and I think I really hope that the two test matches at Wigan and Leeds are packed out with people, because they deserve to be. And they are going to be two really great games, I think. A real challenge for England, and for Sean Wayne, it's going to be a hell of a contest.
Yeah, and just to think that, I doubt this will happen, but Joseph Suaalii, he represented Samoa as well at the last World Cup, I believe it was, and then you obviously throw in Brian To'o, Crichton, Luai, that's a hell of a backline if they were able to get all those players in. Spencer Leniu, who you mentioned in your column as well, he'll be in the pack. So it's shaping up to be an exciting 2 games coming into the year.
It is. And, we've got some pretty good players ourselves. So I think I just hope they're all not injured by the end of the season. That's the only trouble.
Yeah, and I guess England will be out for blood to sort of get revenge for that last time they faced off.
How disappointing was that Samoa World Cup semi-final?
Yeah.
England just... I hate World Cup semi-finals because we seem to blow it so frequently. The only one we didn't quite blow was in 2017 when we played Tonga in the World Cup semi-final, and even then they had a try disallowed that would have won the game for them. So we came pretty close to blowing that one. So. For goodness sake, let's hope that doesn't continue.
Yeah, and I mean, there's going to be heaps of players competing for spots in Sean Wayne's side there, and I'm excited to see what he goes with.
Yeah.
In other international rugby league news, Mal Meninga looks set to be staying on as the head coach of the Kangaroos going forward.
Yes, a 2-year extension. And the thing is that. His last game was in the final of the Pacific Championship last year when Australia lost 30-0 to New Zealand, which wasn't obviously wasn't the best result from his point of view. We still don't know the full details of this year's Pacific Championship, do we? No. We've seen the New Zealand leg of it, sort of. We know that Australia are playing Tonga in Brisbane, but the NRL seems to be very slow at getting these details finalised, and it's a real shame that they are. But I would imagine that we'd see. Australia are playing New Zealand in. I think is it Christchurch they're playing them. I think they are. And New Zealand playing Tonga in Auckland. So we'll probably see Australia and New Zealand, I would think, playing in the final of that of the Pacific Cup, and again that's going to be a real incredible game, isn't it?
Yeah, I can't wait. And hopefully, come the end of the season, we have a healthy side to pick from as an Aussie. Because a lot of players do tend to opt for off-season surgeries and the likes. So.
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see how New Zealand play, isn't it? Because last year they were coached by Michael Maguire, and Maguire was sacked because they didn't want him to coach both New Zealand and New South Wales. I thought that was a bad decision by New Zealand, if I'm really honest about it. And Maguire has shown what sort of a coach he is by winning the State of Origin series. Stacey Jones is going to take over from him with New Zealand, and we don't really know, how that's going to work at the moment. But if Stacey could come anywhere near to doing what Michael achieved, that would be quite a feat, wouldn't it?
Even being in this sort of awkward period of the season, State of Origin feels like months ago now to me. To think that he couldn't focus on New South Wales for a 6 to 8 week period and then come back to New Zealand.
Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Especially with we've still got a few more weeks left in the regular season, then finals, so plenty of time for him to prepare for the New Zealand fixture. But unfortunate. I wonder if they're regretting their decision. Moving on to some other news, mate. Back up here in Super League, Brad Arthur, he's going to stay on as head coach of Leeds for next season.
Only for one season, which has caused a bit of consternation for my colleague Gary Schofield in League Express, who sort of questions why it's only 1 year and what's behind that decision. And obviously, we don't know really, do we? But I've got to say, I think Brad Arthur's made a significant impact at Leeds, particularly on improving Leeds' defence. Leeds' defence looks a lot harder than it did under Rowan Smith. And we saw, with the win against the Catalans last Friday night, that they came from a 6-0 deficit at half-time to win the game. And they are slowly improving, and obviously, they're not guaranteed to finish in the top 8, but they've got a fixture list that certainly, if you look at their fixture list, they've got London away and Hull at home as their next 2 games. Now, those are clearly winnable games, while other teams above them might be playing games that are not so winnable. But then they've got Wigan away and Hull KR away. So, they finish with the 2 hardest games they could possibly pick, and on that basis you might think, they'll struggle to finish in the top 6. But everything is so fluid at the moment that you can't be sure, can you?
Does his appointment sort of reflect what the free agent coaching environment is like at the moment? Do you think do you think Leeds as a club, they're struggling to attract the right coach or the coach they want long term?
I can't imagine that Leeds would struggle to attract anybody, really. But the really interesting thing is that they didn't go for Paul Rowley. You know, a lot of people thought that they would go for Paul Rowley, but they're sticking with Brad Arthur for next year, and that was a surprise to me. It will be a massive relief to Salford fans, of course, and Paul will presumably stick with Salford next year, and I'm delighted to see that because I've got quite a soft spot for Salford. I like to see Salford doing well, battling against the odds, and I hope that they'll continue to do that.
When you look at the way that the Leeds squad is currently constructed, you have to think the players in that squad would significantly benefit from Rowley's system, the way they like to throw the ball around and constantly attack. But maybe Rowley is just happy at Salford and wants to stay there.
Well, hopefully so. Yeah, hopefully so. He certainly seems happy anyway, that's one thing for sure. And he'd be a lot happier after that win at the weekend, wouldn't he?
Oh, definitely. Moving on to some championship news, mate. Wakefield have secured the League Leaders Shield, which probably at the start of the season doesn't come as a surprise.
No, I think everybody thought that would happen, but it's great to see them. Hopefully heading back to Super League next year to replace London, of course, which I'm not so glad about. But it's good to see. I mean, as everybody knows, I'm an old Wakefield supporter from many years past, and I've obviously got a soft spot for Wakefield, and it's I think Matthew Ellis has been an absolute boon to the club. It's the first time in the history of Wakefield that they've had a very wealthy owner, and Matthew has put his money where his mouth is, and has really invested in the team and in the coaching staff and so on, and it's onwards and upwards for them. They're going to be very ambitious next year if they are in Super League, as we expect them to be. I don't think they'll be content with being a bottom half club, put it that way.
Just, I guess, looking at their squad, do you expect them to sort of keep that core group of players together coming back to Super League, or do you think they'll look to splash on some free agents?
No, I think they'll be looking to to sign some players who will be experienced Super League quality or even NRL quality players. I mean, they've already got players like Mike McMeekin coming, haven't they? Which is going to be a real asset to them next year. And they've signed quite a few others. One or two have not been announced yet. But no, I think they will. I think they will approach Super League with a very realistic frame of mind, knowing that what was good enough in the Championship won't be good enough in Super League.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it must be rewarding for Matthew Ellis. I guess he probably feels like he's made the right decision investing in that club with that performance this season.
There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Well, it was interesting that last year, when he was buying the club, he deliberately didn't announce that he'd bought the club until the club had actually been relegated. Because, if he'd announced his ownership at this time, a year ago, while the season was still ongoing, his first achievement with the club would have been to see them relegated. And clearly that would have been very bad PR as far as he was concerned. So he held off a bit, and it was announced after that. And, since his announcement as being the new owner, it's been success following success. And that's absolutely marvellous for the club, isn't it?
Definitely. Moving on to some signing news, mate. Kyle Feldt, it's been announced today that he has signed with St Helens on a 2-year deal, I believe. Exciting signing for St Helens.
Well, who will ever forget that try he scored in the 2015 Grand Final?
I won't forget.
Just before the 80th minute, and just when Brisbane looked as though they were holding on to win.
Broke my heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You must have been quite glad though when the goal kick was missed.
Yeah, I was. I don't know. I was so sort of depressed in the moment that the Broncos have given him another opportunity, and just with how well Thurston kicks those goals, I thought, they've won it. And then, to see it hit the post, and then to give me that false sense of hope, and then for, unfortunately, Ben Hunt to drop that ball off the kickoff, I thought it was all but over.
And you knew it would be, didn't you? You knew that Thurston would kick the drop goal.
That's right.
That was so predictable. But yes, I mean, Kyle Feldt, he's been a mainstay of North Queensland for so many years now, and it almost seems amazing to see him leaving the club, doesn't it? But he's 32. They're signing him for a 2-year deal. Hopefully he's got a lot left in him. And he's a big winger, isn't he? He's a real big guy. And, we'll see what comes of it. But he's going to be replacing Tommy Makinson, who's, again, been such a stalwart for St Helens for such a long time. But I think he's going to be quite a good signing. Yeah,
that's right. Can goal kick. Really good bringing the ball out of their end. And,
doesn't shirk anything, does he?
No. And, it sort of lives in my nightmares, mate. Not many rugby league fans can say that they've been a part of the, two of the biggest upsets in grand final history. Not upsets, but losses, I guess you could say. Losing to Penrith by 2 points last year, and then in Golden Point by 1 point to the Cowboys. So, but I mean, the Broncos have won 6 premierships and lost 2 by a total of 3 points.
Yes.
So breaks my heart a bit when I look at it, but really happy for Kyle, and he's going to be electric in that.
But do you think the Broncos are going to get in the top 8? That's the really interesting. Big game this weekend against the Dolphins.
Winning that game will certainly help. They've obviously got to rely on a few other results to go their way.
Well, they've got to rely on the Dragons losing at least one game.
That's right.
And the Dragons play the Eels this weekend, which is a game that they ought to win, actually. So I can't quite remember who they're playing the final game of the season, but I think it's a much tougher game. But the Broncos have to beat the Dolphins this weekend, and then again, win on the final weekend.
We've got the Melbourne Storm in the final match.
Oh gosh,
so that's a tough ask, and the conundrum that they find themselves in at the moment. Melbourne opting to rest their players this weekend because they've got a flight up to Townsville.
They've won the minor premiership.
And it's a short turnaround for them. So Craig's made the decision to rest. I think he's resting 10 players this week, which I assume means he will play those in the final game against Broncos.
Yeah.
But I sort of look at all the teams fighting for that 8th spot, and I think if you were a Melbourne Storm or a Penrith towards the top of the ladder, you probably don't want to play the Broncos in the finals. You probably don't want to see them in the finals just because they still have a tremendous amount of talent. But, I think if you're in that position, you'd rather play someone like the Dolphins.
Or the Dragons. Yeah.
So
I think the Dragons have overachieved this year, actually, by being in 8th place. And it sort of shows what a good coach Shane Flanagan is.
Yeah.
A lot of people predicted that the Dragons... I mean, last year they were 15th out of 17, and a lot of people predicted that the Dragons would fail again. But Flanagan has obviously revitalised them and done an incredible job. And funny enough, last year the Bulldogs were 16th, weren't they? And now they look as though they're, going to be in the top 5 or even maybe top 4. And Cameron Ciraldo, who a lot of people said last year, was a bit of a flop after moving from Penrith, he's done a fantastic job this year. Revitalising the Bulldogs. And the Bulldogs play Manly at the Olympic Stadium this weekend, and they're expecting a very large crowd indeed, aren't they?
No, I bet. And I think even you and I were talking last year saying that, did Bulldogs sign the wrong Penrith assistant because Webster was going so well with the Warriors? And
well, they were 4th last year, and they're now well out of it. Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. What a difference 12 months can make, that's for sure. Just before we get into this weekend's games, mate, we'll also touch on Ron Coote becoming the 14th immortal.
Yeah, what a wonderful guy. Yeah, and what a great choice. I met Ron Coote in 1997. I was in Australia that year, and of course Ron Coote has the franchise for a lot of McDonald's stores, including the one in King's Cross. And I actually arranged to meet him there and just have a little chat, a brief interview and so on. And he was, such a lovely guy. And, it's just what he deserves as far as I'm concerned, to be an immortal. And in my eyes, he is an immortal. So, and he made some very lovely comments as well about the game when when he received his award from the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, last Wednesday night at the Sydney Cricket Ground function, he made the point that, he loves watching the game today, watches all the games, and he is, blown away by how good modern rugby league is and so on. So he's not one of these, old-time players who comes along and says the game was better in my day. He's more or less sort of saying it's, it's better today. But he did have, the one thing I do remember is he had some great battles with Malcolm Reilly when Malcolm was in Australia. Two incredibly hard men going at each other. When Ron played for Eastern Suburbs and Malcolm played for Manly, they were, they would target each other and give each other as good as they got. And those were incredible days. Yeah, and just like those sort of personal matchups that you see in team sports, they're the ones you don't forget.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
But yeah, it was just nice also seeing how much it meant to him as well. Like he got quite emotional when accepting the honour.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he did cry a bit, and as you said, he never anticipated that he would cry at the age of 80 or 79 or whatever age he is now. But yeah, it was lovely to see, wasn't it?
And I'm just thankful that for someone like him, that he was, he's alive to see himself become an immortal. It'd be a shame if they left it, 15, 20 years later to do it.
Absolutely.
Major props there to Ron Coote, and well deserved. All right, mate. Well, anything else you want to touch on before we get into this weekend's matchups?
No, I don't think so. I think we've covered quite a lot of. The one thing that we ought to talk about actually is Whitehaven, isn't it? Because they were on the verge of going out of business last week. At one stage, it looked as though they wouldn't have a team to play against Dewsbury, but Kyle Moore was appointed the new coach. And Kyle, what a lot of credit he deserves, because Kyle at the moment is a TV pundit. He must be, being paid reasonably well for that, one would imagine. And there was nothing to say that he had to take on that role at Whitehaven, but he's a Whitehaven lad, a Hensingham junior in West Cumbria, and he rallied to the cause, and he got them over the line against Dewsbury with only 14 players. They could only take 14 players down to Dewsbury, which, obviously reflected the turmoil that had affected the club over the week, but he got them to that win. And they're now third from bottom in the championship, battling to avoid the drop, of course, and who knows what's going to happen there. But, if there is somebody watching this in Cumbria who could get onto the board at Whitehaven and make an investment into the club, it's not, they're about 40,000 quid in debt as far as I'm aware, which is peanuts compared to, we talked a week or two ago about Leeds and St Helens both losing over £2 million in 2023, but the difference is that they've got people involved at director level who can bear those losses, and Whitehaven don't. And that's such a shame.
That's right. And I believe there might be some fans that have started a GoFundMe out there.
Yes, well, good luck to them. I hope it all goes well for them. Yeah, I was on Radio Cumbria early today. It's Tuesday at the moment, of course, and talking about that, and hopefully, talking it up a bit, which I always like to do when I'm on Radio Cumbria, because the two Cumbrian professional clubs always seem to be on the edge of a crisis, financial crisis, and yet the strange thing is that the amateur game up there, the community game, always looks incredibly strong. So many of their amateur clubs are in the NCL competition, and you sort of wonder why that success doesn't transfer to the two professional clubs. Well, three professional clubs actually, but Barrow are significantly stronger, than Whitehaven and Workington. But it would be nice to see all three clubs being more prosperous, so to speak, wouldn't it?
Yeah, definitely. All right, mate. Well, how about we move into this weekend's matchups? On Friday, we have Leeds taking on Warrington.
Golly, what a difficult game to predict the outcome of. I think Lee are on a roll at the moment. They didn't play that well against London, but I think they will raise the game against Warrington. So, and particularly, we've talked already about Matt Duffy missing for Warrington, and Cai Taylor-Wray being a great replacement for him. But this is going to be a really big game for him if he plays at full back. It's going to be a tougher game than the Castleford game was, and I think Lee will put a lot of pressure on the young full back. Hopefully he'll come through with flying colours. But so I think Lee might just sneak this one, but I'm not confident. I'm sort of 51-49 in favour of Lee. It's that close, I think.
It's a coin flip, isn't it?
Yeah.
You might see some sort of skyscraping bombs from Lamb and putting Taylor-Wray under pressure.
What's going to be quite interesting is to see whether Matt Moylan is back again for Lee, because he's been missing from the last few games with that rib cartilage problem, and that's a really awkward problem, isn't it? It's a very painful thing, and it takes quite a while to recover from.
Yeah.
So whether he'll be back, I'm not sure.
He won't be wanting to sneeze or cough or anything like that.
No. It's a horrible thing.
Moving to the other matchup on Friday, we've got Hull KR taking on Salford.
Well, we said earlier that it's the battle between Mikey Lewis and Mark Sneed and at halfback, and Hull KR hammered Salford, I think 40-0 in the Challenge Cup earlier this season, and I think they'll be too good for them again. I think they'll be too good down the middle, and of course they've got that incredible threat on the outside backs with Ryan Hall and Joe Burgess. So I think good though Salford are, I think they might be a bit overwhelmed by Hull KR. I think Hull KR could win by 20 points.
Yep. Saturday's matchups, we have Hull FC taking on Castleford.
Well, this is a game that, again, if Hull FC don't want to finish at the bottom of the table, it's a game they need to win. And I think they might just do it, actually. I think, we've got Craig Lingard at the moment. It looks as though Castleford are definitely going to finish 10th, regardless of what happens for the rest of the season. And I think Craig is giving a run out to some of his younger players. So I think that might just work in Hull's favour, and Hull might just sneak it.
Yep. And then we have Catalans taking on Wigan.
Well, what a crucial game for the Catalans, and they don't look to be in good health at the moment. So I think Wigan might win this one, and it might result in Catalans being out of the top 6 for the first time this season. So I think I tip Wigan for that, although not with any great confidence, because Wigan are missing some players, aren't they? But, is Harry Smith back this weekend? I think
I'm not sure.
No, I'd have to check on that. But, I think Wigan are probably good enough to sneak a decision this weekend.
We're expecting Sam Tompkins to still be out as well?
I would think so, yes. I don't think he'll be playing.
I think I heard him saying that was his first hamstring injury that he's had
in
his career.
That's how it goes, isn't it?
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you think, you associate the hamstring injury, everyone probably experiences one at the pro level. One day or another, but yes. Moving on to Sunday's matchups, we have London taking on Leeds.
Well, I think Leeds will win this one. They need to win it, obviously, to sustain their top 8 challenge, or top 6 challenge, I should say. And I think they will be good enough to get the win in London. London have been playing with such a lot of spirit, but at the end of the day, I don't think they've quite got the talent to beat Leeds this weekend.
And in the final matchup, we have Huddersfield taking on St Helens.
Well, again, St Helens urgently need to win this game, and I think they will do, even though they are under strength. I mean, they might have a few players coming back this week. We're not sure yet. We've not seen the teams yet, unfortunately. But, if Saints don't win at Huddersfield, I think they're in big trouble potentially. I think I really think they are. But they've got, if you look at Saints' final games, they've got Huddersfield away, then Warrington away, which is a tough one for them, of course, then Castleford at home, and Lee away in the final game of the season. So there are 2 games there that they ought to win, and 2 games there that are very tough for them. So, who knows?
Just looking at the road home for some of those teams there, it's going to be an exciting end to the season, isn't it?
Really exciting, actually, because a lot of the top teams seem to be playing each other in the final few games of the season. So that's really quite interesting, isn't it?
And I don't think coaches are going to be able to afford to rest players in some of these matchups.
Not at all.
With so much on the line.
Not at all, no.
But yeah, perfect for us, mate. A lot of exciting stuff to talk about going forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, mate, we might wrap it up here. Don't forget, guys, if you want to get your online edition of the League Express paper, head along to totalrl.com/shop. I've got the magazine as well. Make sure you order that one.
Of course.
And don't forget to hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, guys. But if you're happy, mate, I'm happy.
I'm happy. Well, yes, very happy indeed, Jake. And as long as people keep buying our newspaper, magazines, and keep looking at our website and so on.
So if you don't, we might get an angry Martyn Sadler in here if you aren't purchasing.
But no, things are going well. It's building up to a really exciting climax of the season, I think, and that's what we all want to see, isn't it? So, in both sides of the world, actually. So, it's some really fascinating competitions at the moment.
And if everyone can just tune into the Broncos games here on out and just ride them home for me, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, mate, we'll wrap it up here and do it again next week.
That's marvellous. Thanks a lot,
Awesome.
Jake.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers. Bye.